Hello, comic book junkies. It's the Frog Queen here, and today I'm bringing you a very special interview with comic book writer and creator Mike Carey. If you've been reading my blog or watching this channel for any length of time, then you likely know how big a fan I am of his work, which includes such incredible titles as Lucifer, Sandman, Hellblazer, Unwritten, Batman, Ultimate Fantastic Four, X-Men Endangered Species, and that's just barely scratching the surface of his outstanding career. Today, however, we are going to talk about his latest comic book, The Highest House, with longtime illustrating partner in crime, Peter Gross. Published by IDW, you can grab issue 1 and 2 of The Highest House at a comic book shop near you. And so, let's get into the interview.
Okay.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. We'll begin now.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
I did want to talk to you about Highest House. I'm just gonna open it up on my desktop so I have it in front of me. I read it a couple times actually when we originally wanted to do this on Friday, but I was ill, which unfortunately is kind of common for me. I'm sorry.
I forgot to ask how you're feeling. Your throat seems to be completely, well, you sound normal.
I'm kind of normal. I'm still kind of croaky, but yeah, I'm all right. I spent a couple days in bed with a hot water bottle. It was fantastic. Watched some anime. That was about it. But yes, Highest House. My first question, of course, for this is basically, I think when we were speaking, you said that this was very much a passion type project for you, like something you've been thinking about for a long time. Can you tell me just a bit about how this story was conceptualized and conceived?
It's a passion project in two ways, really. I mean, it was a story that that had been in the back of my mind for a long time. I wanted to do a story like a high fantasy, a sort of heroic fantasy, but with a lot of political themes running through it. And slavery is kind of it's something that a lot of people simply assume is no longer a feature of the modern world, but it emphatically is. It just operates in different ways now, and sort of under a lot of people's radar. So I wanted to write a story about that topic, but also I very much wanted to work with Peter Gross again. We've done
Right.
a lot of work together for Vertigo. We started out, way back around the turn of the millennium with Lucifer, and we did Unwritten together. And we do seem to sort of have a really good dynamic when we. So that was also part of the logic here to do another book with Peter, and to do a book for the European market, which neither of us had ever done. France has an amazing comic book tradition. A lot of which never makes it into Anglophone editions.
I know. I'm one of those horrible people who like search for fan translated books online.
That's okay, I do that too.
It's like, I know this isn't published in English. Somebody translated it, probably poorly, but I'll still read it.
So it was all of that stuff coming together, and well, I'd met Olivier Jalabert, our editor, back when he briefly worked for uh, a billionaire who wanted to set up a comic company as a sort of train set, and and I talked to Olivier about doing a book in that context, and I decided not to. I guess because cross-gen was at the back of my mind. It's not always a great thing when rich people sort of play at being comic publishers.
I've heard this a few times.
So I didn't. But then Olivier ended up working for Édition Glénat for a French publishing house that has a very, very awesome list. And he reached out to me again and said, would I like to pitch a book to him? And I contacted Peter and said, should we do something? Should we do a fantasy book? And Highest House grew out of that conversation.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting that you said like the European market because I of course got it from IDW, which I never really consider European. But are they European? And
No, no. So
no.
it was originally published in French by
Oh, okay.
Édition Glénat
Okay.
in the form of those sort of gorgeous hardcover albums. That
Oh.
French publishers do. 60, so not, yeah, 64 pages, 46 story pages. So what you have there, the first issue is half of the first French graphic novel.
Okay, this makes a lot more sense to me now. I did not know you speak French as well as English.
Kind of. I mean, I read French. I can say I have enough French to get by, but
Okay.
I wrote it in English, and Glenna hired a translator.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and then for the IDW edition, we just went back to my original script.
Oh, okay. That's awesome.
So
This
it
is
hasn't been translated twice.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that it had been originally published in French. That's interesting, because I read the press release and I don't remember that being in the press release. It could have been, and I just blanked on it. But that's super interesting. That makes more sense now because I was like, European, IDW. I was getting a little confused.
But that's why it's in that really interesting format, the sort of larger than normal pages. The European books are published very large, and they have these traditions. You know, they tend to have higher panel counts per page. It's not unusual to have 10 or a dozen panels on a page. Very few splash pages.
Mm-hmm.
um, a sort of emphasis on the middle distance shot, rather than on sort of lots of close-ups for emotion and wide shots for action.
Mm-hmm.
So we were learning that lexicon as we
That's
went along.
awesome.
And I don't know if you agree with me, but I think it's some of the best work that Peter's done. I think it's a gorgeous book.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Uh,
Yeah, that's like the first thing that drew me to it. Actually, was just I had only seen pieces of the artwork, and then I went and said, "Okay, who is this by again? This looks familiar." And then I see Peter Gross, and then your name, and I was like, "Oh, okay. Now I have to read this." But it was initially the artwork I saw first, because whenever I get a press release from anyone, like the artwork is the first thing I look at. I ignore all the write up and then I go back and read it if I like the artwork.
yeah,
Which is
yeah,
kind of horrible of me, but you know, if I'm going to read a graphic novel, for the most part, I have to be drawn to the art first,
sure.
essentially.
It's like with food. You know, the first bite is with the eye. And then that amazing cover that Yuko did for us, I think definitely draws the eye. It's beautiful both in the color version and in the black and white variant. But
Oh, I didn't see the variant cover.
Yuko works with a brush, and she does it all in it's just black and white, and then she scans it and digitally colors.
Oh, okay.
Her original work is always just a black and white ink drawing, which is, yeah, it's a medium that she excels in.
Yeah, and she did a lot of the covers for Unwritten as well,
Yep,
correct? Yeah.
the entire run, in fact.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I have most of Unwritten actually. I read a lot of it digitally, but I have like the first, 4 or 5 volumes just in singles, floppies and such. And I was like, didn't she do all of the covers? I probably have some variant covers in there somewhere or something too. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think Peter did some variant covers along the way.
and his covers are lovely as well, like very
Yeah.
lovely.
But Yuko doesn't do much comics work. Mostly she does magazine illustration and book illustration, and
Hmm.
she works for newspapers. We got to meet her because she did a portrait of Neil Gaiman for the New York Times for an interview, um,
Right.
company an interview, and Karen Berger, who was then still senior editor at Vertigo,
Vertigo.
reached out to her and said, do you want to do some work, some comics work? And we tried for a long time to get her to do some interior art for Unwritten, and
Right.
she flatly refused. She said, if you do a comics page, that's like 5 or 6 drawings, and you're just getting paid for once. No.
That's awesome. But I mean, if you're used to just being a cover artist, like I totally get that. And like I know a lot of cover artists who, will refuse to do interiors completely, but they're so full of work on just covers that it's like I don't have the time. Like
Yeah.
I do better like financially off of cover work. So like I totally get it.
But we
Um,
would still love to see her do some narrative work. I think she would be amazing. We
yeah, I
we
agree.
cheated a couple of times we did. I asked her to do covers that were like mimicking old-fashioned Silver Age comic book stories. So we sort of sneakily got some narrative work out of it.
That's so funny. Oh, all right. I was gonna ask you too, since we're on the topic of the artwork and stuff. How much research did you and Peter have to do for this book? Because there's so much detail and so many references to like medieval sort of devices and the way that medieval people actually built things. Like, did you just spend like a ridiculous amount of time researching, or perhaps this is stuff you already knew? I don't know. I didn't
No,
know,
no,
so.
it definitely wasn't stuff I already knew. I did a fair amount of research on the roofing. Yeah, when Moss gets that tutorial from Flass about how to work with different kinds of roof coverings, I researched that, and so did Peter. I sent him some YouTube videos, links to videos about thatching, and we sort of tried to make sure that we got the details right for that. But a lot of it is just made up, or is sort of based on the look of medieval buildings. So visual reference, but not a great deal of
Okay.
actual.
Like in one of the first pages, there's a mention of something called the like the Scold's Brittle, and I had to look that up because I did not know what that was, and then I regretted looking it up, of course,
Yeah,
because it's a medieval sort of torture sort of device to punish people.
to punish women. It's a torture device for sorry, it's my phone going off. A torture device for uppity women who talk too much. Yeah, it's
Was that what it really was for? Like women who like gossip or just talk
yeah.
in general, or
A scold was a woman who sort of talked out of line, was angry or surly or insulting to a
oh,
man.
okay, wow, yes. So that yeah that one. Oof. I had to look that one up. That was creepy, for sure. There was a couple other references that I looked up, like when I was reading the book, just because I didn't know what it was. But there was one word that I found really familiar, and it was called. I'm probably going to say it wrong, but Koveki. Is it Koviki or Koveki?
Kaviki, yeah.
Koviki.
So that's yeah, the political background of our story, and of course all of this is purely invented. So it's set in Asaniel, and Asaniel used to have a sort of polytheistic religion where you could basically worship any kind of deity or any kind of spirit at all, and a lot of those spirits were genii loci. They were spirits of a particular place, but then they get invaded by the Kaviki, who are they're monotheists. They only believe in the goddess. They have goddess worship, and they kind of rewrote history. So once that invasion had been completed, it was no longer allowed. No one could worship anybody other than the goddess on pain of death. But they also kind of they deny the validity of the past. The ruling families of Asaniel used to have magical powers that grew out of pacts with these supernatural entities. But you're not allowed to talk about that anymore. There is no magic. There is no nothing, no supernatural power except the goddess, which means that nobody remembers Obsidian until Moth arrives at Highest House and starts to have conversations with Obsidian. This is all stuff that comes much more to the fore in issue 2.
Yeah, Moth in general is a really interesting character. And I have no idea how old he's supposed to be. Is he supposed to be like 10 or 12? I can't.
There, I mean, he probably doesn't know himself. Yeah, he comes from a very, very small pre-literate community. So yeah, he's around about on the cusp of puberty, but not quite there yet.
Because I've only read the first issue, I I was wondering, like, is this an all ages book, or is this like for a teenage and up sort of audience?
That's a good question. I would say the latter. I mean, it's there's a violent scene. There's a very violent scene in issue 2 that probably precludes it being all ages. I guess the thing is, because Peter and I worked on like 150 issues of Lucifer and the Unwritten,
Mm-hmm.
which were all for the sort of mature readers imprint, Vertigo. We kind of still, when we work together, that's our headspace.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say it probably isn't all ages. There's a little bit of sexual content, quite a lot of violent content,
Okay.
and
All
mature
right.
generally.
That's good to know. I mean, I have a lot of nieces and one nephew who can't read yet. He's not old enough, but I'm always, and a lot of my viewers, the people who like read my reviews and stuff, are often like, I want to get my kids alternative comics, but it can be hard to figure out, is this going, if you haven't read it all yourself, is this going to be for them or not? You know what I mean? But so it's something I always like to ask if I can't tell. And sometimes at the beginning of a story, you just can't tell if it's going to be okay for kids or not. Because
Yeah.
at first you'll be like, oh yes, this sounds fine, and then bam, a couple issues in, you're like, whoa, I was not expecting that to happen.
It's never gratuitous, I think. I mean, we've done all but a few pages of the 6 issues that will make the miniseries, and that there are, I guess, there would be about 3 scenes that are quite violent, quite overtly violent, and there's a couple of sex scenes which are mostly just implied.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even sort of like on page nudity, but sex is discussed.
Right, yeah. Which I always think is like perfectly fine. I love reading erotica, but I don't like my genres to mix. Sometimes when I'll be reading, I think it was recently a couple of Valiant books, recent Valiant series, where they're kind of like along that superhero-y vein, but then it's like bam, sex, and I'm just like, what? I'm reading erotica now. What happened? Like it kind of catches you off guard, and it's just like, yeah, I don't think these two stories meld. I don't know who this is written for anymore. That kind of thing.
Like,
Uh,
I guess, yeah, the sex in Highest House is because sexual politics are part of
mm-hmm,
Highest House. There's a character who you meet in issue 3, Shurabai, who is the daughter of Lord Demony, the daughter of the noble family, the only daughter of the noble family that rules Highest House.
mm-hmm,
So she's somebody who has extremely high status in this society, except she is also a woman, and therefore her father has complete say over her destiny, and
mm-hmm,
she's going to be married to a guy named Vistin Caro, who is the son, the scion of another noble family, and she has no say in that. It's a
mm-hmm.
decision that's being made over her head by the two fathers, as a way of sort of cementing an alliance between the two families. So it's that, I guess. It's sort of the Kyriarchy.
Yeah, and I mean, I expect a certain amount of that stuff to happen in books, but yeah, I definitely appreciate it more when it's implied in a story, rather than just flat out like, let's have like a 3-page sex scene
Yeah.
in the middle of this like fantasy book. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Unless it's supposed to all be about that. You know what I mean? Anyway, but oh no, I can appreciate that very much. That's gonna be great. I mean, of course, I've read your Hellblazer work, all of Lucifer. I've read Unwritten, and I've read one of your novels.
Oh, okay. Which one?
Um, was it? I think it's the one that got turned into the Netflix movie. Is it
Got
the
all the games.
Yeah, the girl with all the gifts. I was like, it's a recent one, but I read it a while ago. Okay, it's hard for me to remember sometimes when I've read something because literally just read all the time. So um, I can't remember when I read it.
Okay.
To be
It's been
honest
out
with
for
you.
about 4 years.
So,
Like,
but I'm very familiar with your work, of course. And I think we talked a bit about Hellblazer a couple years ago, in a written article, I think, that I did with you. That's
yeah.
probably like 4 years ago now. But so, yeah, I'm really familiar with your work. And I did find when I was reading, even though it's only one issue, that this seemed quite like a departure. There was things I found really familiar about it, about your writing, but it just, the whole story in general seemed quite different. And I don't know if it's because of the younger characters or
Mm.
not. I was trying to pinpoint it yesterday. But yeah, it does feel like a very different story to me when I look back on other stories that I've read by you, which I think is really interesting. Um,
I
anyway,
guess,
how do you feel about it?
well, I guess I don't normally do heroic fantasy, the sort of fantasy that's set in a quasi-medieval world. Most of what I've done is in a modern setting, and it's mostly a sort of. I'm reluctant to use the phrase urban fantasy because I think it's very poorly defined. But you know, I guess urban fantasy covers that whole sort of weird interface between fantasy and horror.
Mm-hmm.
Hellblazer sits there, and the Felix Caston novels sat there. Maybe the Unwritten did to a certain extent, or the Unwritten straddled it. So yeah, I guess in that sense it's different. It doesn't feel like a huge departure. I think thematically it's gonna touch on areas that we've explored before,
Okay.
that Peter and I have been to before. Um, it's Yeah, it's different furniture, but I think that the more you read of it, the more you'll see that it actually plays into some pretty familiar fields for us.
Okay. Do you find like when you're working with someone that you know so well, like Peter and you, for instance, do you find like the work comes out faster, or it's like the productivity level is just like much higher because you're so used to each other, or like how does that dynamic work?
It's definitely different working with
Hmm.
Peter than it is working with any other artist. As far as productivity goes, this project was logistically really difficult. It was complicated by the fact that Peter had surgery on his
Oh.
while he was working on the third of the French graphic novels, which will be issues 5 and 6 of the miniseries. So there was a period where he couldn't work because he was just recovering from surgery and getting the use of his drawing hand back. Um, so it was slower than it usually was, but for very good reason.
Mm.
What does happen, I think, with Peter is that because we know each other so well, there's a flexibility to the way that we work. I'll send in a script, and he'll look at the pages, and then he'll have better ideas. He'll come back to me and he'll say, I don't want to do this page in this way. Actually, I'd like to compress these 2 pages into one so that we can do this somewhere else. Um, that kind of uh, organic way of working is something that I only do with Peter, really, not with other artists.
Hmm.
I tend to be a little bit pernickety if an artist changes. For example, you each page has got a final panel, which is the break point to the next page, and I expend a lot of thought on that, on pacing, and it it really ticks me off if the artist shifts the break point so the page turn comes at a different place. But with Peter, the script is kind of an invitation to negotiate. It's the start of a process rather than the end of a process, and that's led to some amazing thing, especially on Unwritten and Highest House, which we kind of co-created, co-plotted. Although we're credited as writer and artist, in fact, the relationship is a bit more fluid than that.
Hmm. Cool. That's interesting for sure. I think it's really interesting how just like creators collaborate in general. I mean, it's got to be hard. Does Peter live like close by, or do you do it all online?
No, he lives in Minnesota, and I live in London.
Oh.
So it's all, it's phone conversations and email chains and so on. Back when we worked on Unwritten, when Pornsack was our editor, which was like the first 2 years or so,
Mm.
maybe no, first 4 years, I guess. He used to hook us up for these immensely long phone conferences every week, and a lot of the story plotting was done during those phone calls.
Interesting.
We've only met. I mean, we've met maybe a dozen times or so. When I've been in the US for a convention, or Peter's been over here.
Oh, okay. That's interesting, though. Oh, when you work with someone for so many years, and you're like, maybe see each other, just this much.
Yeah, we get on really well. Yeah, we're really good friends as well as collaborators. I think he's a wonderful person. But yeah, it's very rarely that we get to meet, sadly.
So, are you planning on doing any conventions this year?
In the US.
Anywhere?
Yeah, I've got a reasonably full schedule this year, but not in America. It's been a while since I went to either of the Comic Cons, New York or LA, or San Diego. Sorry, I'm going to Sweden, to
Oh,
Stockholm, in June. I'm going to Avales in northern Spain, um, or Lisbon. I'm doing a sci-fi colloquium in Lisbon. So quite a lot of European appearances, but no American ones at the moment.
okay.
That's probably because comic books have become a smaller part of my total workload. For
Mm-hmm.
15 years, comics was the main thing that I did, and everything else was around the edges. And now probably the novels are the main thing I do, and it's comics and screenwriting around the edges.
And did you not just release a novel, or did I just read that it's coming, just about to be released? I'm not sure.
So, Boy on the Bridge got its paperback release
Okay, that's what I read. Yeah,
last month. There's another book coming out from Orbit in November called Someone Like Me,
someone like me.
and they're re-releasing the Castor novels. So, Devil You Know
Oh,
uh,
okay.
also got a US re-release last month.
Cool, cool. I definitely have to read those. Yeah, for sure. Because I haven't read that one yet. Any of those ones yet. So, and I don't get to read very many novels, unfortunately,
Right.
because my like read pile for comics is just so vast. It's kind of pathetic. I'll sit down, I'll read the first 100 pages of a novel, and then it'll sit there for a month, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, that novel that I was reading, and pick it up
Yeah.
and read another 100 pages.
Or you go back and reread the first 100 pages because you've forgotten some of it. Yeah.
That does happen occasionally. I'm not gonna lie. If it was a really good book, I won't forget it, but I will forget things like if it's been too long or if I didn't really like it. But life's too short to be reading books that you don't really enjoy. So
Yeah, I've become much more ruthless about throwing stuff out if I'm not enjoying it. I used to sort of feel a kind of anally retentive need to get to the end of anything I started. I don't anymore.
yeah, I'm very similar that way. Are you reading anything now?
So I just finished reading Stephen King's 11/22/63,
Oh yeah. Okay.
his time travel novel, which I enjoyed enormously. In fact, I've been doing a sort of Stephen King season for about 6 months now. I've just been picking up a lot of Stephen King's that I didn't read at the time, and
There's so
discovering,
many.
yeah, so many, but and so different. Uh,
Hmm.
Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, From a Buick 8, Tommy Knockers, all of that stuff. But
Oh, Tommy Knockers.
at the moment, I'm reading a book called From Bacteria to Bark by Daniel Dennett, which is a
Okay.
book about the origin and evolution of human consciousness, um, which is really mind-bending, very, very difficult and very, very interesting.
So is a nonfiction book or?
Yeah, he's a sort of well, I guess he's a philosopher, and he's a philosopher who mainly works in that field. He did a book called Consciousness Explained, which was very, very controversial. Um,
Ah.
you either love it or hate it.
That sounds like a Milligan type book. I'm gonna ask Milligan if he's read that yet. It hasn't anything to do with consciousness or psychological development. I'm sure he's like got it on his read list.
I think he would, if he hasn't read it, he would really be interested. Yeah.
um, yeah, that sounds really cool. I feel half the time that I'm too stupid to be able to appreciate books like that. I'm just like I'm not learned enough.
Well,
So,
he does. I guess he writes popular science. Yeah, he's bringing those ideas into a lay forum because I'm not trained in that discipline either. He did a book called Intuition Pumps, which is about tools for thinking, which was very definitely for a lay audience. I recommend it really highly. It's a really enjoyable read. Consciousness Explained is harder, as in it
Yeah,
makes your ears bleed after a while.
it sounds hard. I probably will not be reading it, but it does sound very interesting. um, do you find like any of these kinds of sorts of books will inspire you for like future stories and stuff? Is that kind of like how why you read certain things, or is it more for pleasure?
It's for pleasure, but it all goes in and then sort of sits around in the melting pot, and I think it does come out in stories,
Mm-hmm.
very much so. Um, so everything you read is tools for storytelling, one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Um, I also wanted to ask you because I was such a huge fan of like Lucifer and Hellblazer and all that stuff. Um, and they had recollected over the last few years. Vertigo had republished the bigger versions of the Lucifer,
Yeah.
which were really nice. I purchased them all because I had just little bits and pieces of all like the original Lucifer trades. So now that I had the whole set, it's like, oh, it was so fun to go back and read it from beginning to end. And I know that they had relaunched Lucifer for a little while, and I don't remember who was writing it.
Holly Black.
Holy Black, okay. Um, and I know they, of course, they had the Lucifer television series, which was. I have a hard time watching TV. It doesn't hold my attention very long, but I did get through about 10 episodes, so that's better than most series for me. But I was wondering if you ever would be possibly writing Lucifer again, or if you'd even want to.
I don't think so. I'm delighted that that those stories those characters keep being revisited. They're about to do another line of Sandman books now, aren't they? Sandman Universe books,
Oh, okay.
with Neil as a creative consultant. So they're relaunching
Oh,
Lucifer
yes, the Sandman one. Yeah.
and the Dreaming and that stuff. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's a really rich universe, and as someone who's sort of um, effectively got his start as a creator by sort of playing in that sandbox. I think it's cool that Vertigo is still allowing people to do that. I don't want to go back because I think with Lucifer, Peter and I finished the story that we wanted to tell,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it would feel weird to then pretend that that ending was just like a chapter break.
Right.
I,
Cool.
I read one of the writers I hugely admire and follow is China Miéville, who wrote Perdido Street Station and The Scar, City in the City.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And the third he wrote three novels that are set in a world called Baslag, in and around a city called New Krobazun. And the third of them, Iron Council, has this astonishing, spectacular set piece ending that's really heart wringing. And I asked him, the only time I've ever met him in the flesh, I asked him, when is the fourth book coming out? And he said, well, maybe never, but certainly not for a long, long time, because I don't want people to get to that point, the end of Iron Council, and then just immediately go on to something else. I wanted to sit there and sink in, and I totally get that. And I guess I feel the same way about our Lucifer stories. We ended it where we wanted to end it,
Mm-hmm.
and I would feel a bit weird pretending that that was just like to be continued.
Mm-hmm.
Although I'm fine with other people continuing it.
Yeah. Is it weird having other people writing on something that, I mean, when I think of Lucifer, I'm never going to think of Lucifer as anyone but the way you wrote him.
Thank you.
And it was very difficult for me to read the new Lucifer books. And I think I stopped after just a few issues because I was just like, It's not that it was written poorly or anything. It's just that it was different, and I guess that I was not willing to accept that difference.
It's a very different interpretation of the character, and it's sort of a new setting and a new status quo. As with the TV series, it's only disturbing if you think there's just the one sort of right version of it.
Yeah.
My Lucifer ended up being, I think, quite different from Neil's, although he starts out very much as Neil's Lucifer, and then at a certain point it kind of veered off into a direction that Peter and I wanted to take it in, and Neil was cool with that. Neil has said on several occasions, not about our Lucifer, but just about storytelling in general, that the indebtedness of one story to another is a fact of life. That basically you're all throwing ingredients into a big stew. That's what popular culture is.
Yes.
And then you take a big heaping bowl full of the stew yourself, and it's kind of crazy to begrudge other people the use of your ingredients.
Yeah. I guess fans don't quite feel that way, and in fact, some of them are downright moved to write angry letters and tweets about things, but I'm not like that. I just if I don't like something, I just give up and move on. But yeah, I definitely can see why other people wouldn't be. You don't go back and hate on someone who carried your character forward to a different level or wherever. That makes sense as professionals.
Yeah, and I guess coming back to your original question, yes, it does sometimes feel weird if you just immediately if you stop work on a series and then you read the next issue, then there is a strangeness, because it's like that's not how those characters talk in your mind. Other writers put in their idiom in there. And so what I tend to do, when I finished Hellblazer and when I finished X-Men, I had like a 6-month moratorium. I bought the issues, but I didn't read them. I let them stack up.
Okay.
Read them later.
Yeah, that's what I should probably do when it's something like my favorite characters. Get some distance. I mean, and then generally as a fan, like, you generally have some distance anyways, because one series ends and it doesn't immediately pick up again. Except Hellblazer had some trouble with that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The DC Universe version. Yeah.
I was just like,
I didn't see. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
I didn't see the point of that. I know that John started in the DC Universe, and so I didn't have any problem with there being a DCU book with John in. But I sort of felt like, why did that mean that the Vertigo book had to end? You can have Ultimate Spider-Man and 616 Spider-Man. So.
And that's ultimately what I didn't get, because I was actually really enjoying Riley Rossmo, and I think it was Leslie Hung. I can't remember who was writing it now, because it was a while ago. Anyways, I really like Riley Rossmo's work, and I was enjoying the run. And then they're just like, kaput, and then let's throw Constantine over into the New 52 and completely change his history, which I didn't like, of course. I was like, wait, I'm not that dedicated to kind of continuity in that way. I'm like, you should always be able to remake characters, especially ones that have been around for a very long time. Like, he has been around Constantine's been around for a while.
Oh, yeah.
But did he originally start in Swamp Thing? I can't remember, or was it Sandman? It's Swamp Thing, right?
Yeah. He comes in, so basically Alan Moore needed somebody who knew more about the plant elementals and the Parliament of Trees than the Swamp Thing himself did. So you get John Constantine coming in as kind of like this know-all, this irritating know-all character.
Right. And I mean, I was never a Swamp Thing person. That was not my bag. But I remember reading a little bit about the origins of Constantine. Anyways, it didn't matter. I was on the Hellblazer trail. It didn't matter where he came from to me at the time.
Right.
But because it was referenced 100 times over the span of several decades, and then they go and changed it, I was kind of like, whoa, I don't know about this. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah,
And then
it's
I just stopped reading
frustrating.
it.
It's frustrating, isn't it, when something like that happens? It's because you're invested in that version of the character,
Hmm.
giving them a different past. So like
Hmm.
it's like removing the foundations of a building.
Yeah, it was a bit shocking. Anyway, so and I think it lost more readers than it picked up ultimately, and I think that's bad. If you lose more readers than you create, then
Yeah.
you've got a problem. But anyways, I now he's off still in the DC universe doing something that I'm not paying attention to. But well, isn't he like a part of like the Justice League or something now? Something crazy. I can't even remember. But he's part of some group right
Uh,
now.
I think there was certainly a time when he was part of Justice League Dark, this sort
Maybe
of
that's what it
like
was.
natural iteration of the Justice League. You should go back and look at the Swamp Thing stories. Some of them were amazing. Uh,
Yeah.
there was a wonderful, a kind of ridiculous arc where they became part of one of the Infinite Crisis storylines.
Oh, okay.
Um, but Alan Moore sort of turned it into something extraordinary when it could have been like a train wreck. It was issue 46, 47, and 48 of the original run.
Okay, so the original run of Swamp Thing. I should read it then. You're right, I probably should. I mean, enough people reference it repeatedly. I think I've read bits and pieces of it, but never sat down and read it all the way through.
I think it's yeah, it's a fascinating artifact of its time, and it was a in terms of the evolution of American comic book stories, long form storytelling. It was
Hmm.
fascinating. I think more is doing this thing where you basically just got one story running through that's told sometimes in long arcs and sometimes in standalones, but it's the same sort of same set of characters sort of drifting in and out through these stories, and then Gaiman in Sandman takes that and runs with it and turns it into something even more amazing.
And that I have read all of. So I am probably missing a piece of the puzzle if I by ignoring Swamp Thing like I do. I think for me when I was younger, I was like Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing's ugly. I don't want to read about something ugly. And that's probably what it was. Quite honestly, that's probably why I never read it. And then after a while, things get buried in time. But
Yeah,
no, it makes sense that I should just read it. Amy, Mike Carey says to go and read Swamp Thing.
sorry.
I'll put it on the list. Even if he's ugly. The other thing is like I actually did read Man Thing. Um
Oh, the Marvel one. Okay.
so I mean, if I
Uh,
had read Man Thing, you'd think I should probably have read Swamp Thing as well, which I did not. So
there was a storyline in Cerebus the Aardvark where Swamp Thing and Man Thing get to meet up, and everyone assumes it's going to be a big fight, and it turns out that one of them is male and the other is female, and they just mate.
oh my god, I have not read that part. I just started reading. I've written. Kent Cerberus is so huge. I think it's 320 issues or something. I met Gearhart this last fall, and we did an interview. But he was here for our Halifax Con
Uh-huh.
here in Nova Scotia, and we met and did an interview. It was fantastic. He signed a bunch of my giant books and prints that I had of him and from him and stuff. So we got to talking about Cerberus, and Cerberus is so long I only read bits and pieces. So I've actually been going back through Cerberus from the beginning and trying to get it. Now it's actually hard to get in the volumes, so I have to kind of get bits and pieces online and then from the library and trying to track all the bits and pieces down. But I couldn't actually purchase the volumes. I think there's like 10 or 11 in total
Yeah.
because they're out of print. But anyway, so yeah, I haven't read that particular story yet in Cerberus, but yeah, that'll be fun when I come across that one. The idea that one of them's female is really funny.
It's
Oh,
one of the things that makes it very hard, I think, to read Cerebus now is that so much of it was like inside baseball stories and jokes about the state of comics in the 80s when it was being written and drawn. And you kind of need like extensive footnotes and some kind of apparatus criticus to make sense of it now.
Well,
And of
I think
course, at a certain point, it kind of melts down altogether when Sim um, starts using it as a vehicle for strange misogynist ideas.
which Gerhardt kind of I was like I asked him about that and he was just like, "Oh, it's in the book, Amy." And I was like, "Yeah, I hadn't gotten that far into the series." So not really. I mean, I'm still going to read that part just to have read it, but knowing me, I'll get so frustrated with it. I don't know. It's going to be bad anyway. But yeah, he was highly, at the time, criticized highly for all of that stuff. So
But it's still an amazing book. The draftsmanship is gorgeous. It's one of the most beautiful comic books out there, and it has an influence on other artists. A whole generation of artists looked at what he was doing with the page and thought, "Whoa, yeah, I want to try that too."
which is really interesting too because he was actually self-taught, which I didn't know until I actually met him. I was like, "You've never gone to art school?" He's like, "No." I was like, "Oh my god, that's insane." Because he looks like an architect, like the way he draws. Like I was like, I
Yes.
thought you were like at least an architect, you know. But anyway, I realized I am absorbing so much of your time. I did want to know when we can expect the second issue of Highest House. I have an advance copy. Did it not come out this Wednesday? Is it coming out next Wednesday?
Um, no, I think it came out last week, the first issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And I'm not sure what the schedule is, whether it's monthly or bi-monthly, but soon, I guess, is the answer. The intention is to release all 6 issues in rapid succession. Having said that, Peter is still working on issue 6. So, yeah, fingers crossed.
Awesome. I really liked it. I'm really excited to see where it goes. It did still feel very different to me from everything else that I've read by you and Peter. But I'm really enjoying it, and I really like Moth. I think he's going to be such a great character. He's already very interesting, although I am very concerned about what happened to his sister. Do we actually get to find out?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
We meet Jet again in issue 6. In the
Okay.
meantime, we have 2 very interesting characters coming in issue. Well, I like them anyway. Issue 3, Shirabai, who is the daughter of the house, and her maidservant Lace, who were some of my favorite characters to write, and I think they're some of Peter's favorite characters to draw as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this interview and taking the time. I know we had a little bit of a rough start there.
No, it's a great pleasure to talk, Amy.
Excellent. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And I will let you know once I've get this edited and up on YouTube and on the website and everything. I'll just tag you across social media and everything. And it usually takes me about a week. I just uploaded my last creator interview today, so I'll probably upload this one next Monday, if that's all right,
Great.
timing wise.
Yeah, look forward to it. Cheers,
Okay,
Amy.
great.
Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.